to the governance town hall. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute. We're just going to let everyone get admitted from the waiting room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us. While we're waiting for people to join, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping items. This webinar is recorded. We will go ahead and post the recording on the governance webpage. I will share the link in the chat shortly. Following the meeting, we will also update the frequently asked questions section of that website with anything that comes up today and anything we aren't able to get to. So look out there by the next day or so. That will be updated to reflect today's discussion. Please use the Q&A box throughout the call if you have questions. We are going to hold all the questions until the end of the session, just so we can get through all the content, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. If you would like to, when we get to the Q&A portion, if you would like to come off mute and ask your question verbally, we encourage that. Just raise your hand and I will unmute you when we get to you and allow you to ask your question. If there's anything else we can assist you at all, feel free to use the chat. I'll be monitoring that in the Q&A box throughout the session today. And like I noted, we'll be recording today's session and we'll post a recording after the call on the governance webpage. So with that, Mickey, I will turn it over to you to get started.
Well, thank you, Caitlin, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to have you here, and can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us on this. This is our Governance Task Force Town Hall, and it's the second of our Town Hall meetings, and we have really put into place a process we hope are reaching out and into the AIA network as deep as possible and touch as many people as possible with the work that we're doing. So initially, go to the first one, please, Caitlin. The next slide. So the Governance Task Force. This was really initiated by a resolution that was put forward at AIA 24 by the Component Network, and in response to issues that they felt needed addressing for governance, decision-making, process, transparency. And so the board of directors decided to put this task force together, and we started our work in March of 2025. And initially, the work was setting our task force members into place, starting to talk about the issues that the resolution have brought forward, as well as the results of the member voice task force that had gone on previously a few years before, and really trying to take that information. And then we took it out into an interview process with a number of different stakeholders, component networks, individuals, interested parties within the AIA to kind of gauge what the issues really were. So, Caitlin, next one, please. So really from those interviews, and we did dozens and dozens of interviews, and I want to thank Susanna Kelly, who you'll meet in a few minutes, who really led the charge on that as our consultant on the project. Really, there were 6 things that came forward pretty consistently throughout all of the interviews that we have. And first was really taking the member voice task force findings and really increase the communication across the volunteer groups and get reactions to what that was, because the member task force recommendations were very well done, but I don't think we did a good job of really taking them forward beyond just what the report was. And so we really wanted to utilize that as a basis for the work that we were doing. Then we need to really look at the governance structure. What works, what doesn't work, we always go in the philosophy of, if it's working really well, leave it alone. If it's not working, then let's figure out a way to change it to make it work better. And so effectiveness and efficiency were very important with this, but also transparency of the decision-making process and really looking at this is more than a structural change. This is really looking at how we do a cultural, behavioral, and communications change as well, so that roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and we have an opportunity to make the network stronger from a communication standpoint, both from what the board does down into the network, but also what the network is doing and up to the board to give them better information and make more informed decisions. And that really comes off of enhancing collaboration across all of the AIA, both the component network and all of the governing bodies, whether it's the governing bodies within the institute network or the governing bodies that are within the component network itself. But really a more collaborative process where the Strategic Council plays an integral role in that navigating that particular process as the representative body of what the AIA is and being able to reach back down into that network more effectively, which then comes to empowering volunteers of making decisions and establishing the oversight of the organization. Additionally, we want to make clearer pathways into the leadership network for the AIA and how do we establish that. And you'll see some of our proposal as we get into the structural elements of that. But the idea is how do we create opportunities for more volunteers to get more engaged, to be part of the decision-making process. And then building trust and transparency. That was the number one thing we heard about from everybody. And we're hoping that first steps are what we're doing right now is really reaching out and offering the opportunity to everybody to really give us their insights and their comments and ideas and take those and try and build it into what we're doing with our proposals and then what ultimately the recommendations will be in both changing the structure and changing procedurally. The idea is that structural changes will happen as per our bylaws dictate that, but we can certainly start to implement the changes that we need from a procedural and a behavioral and a cultural standpoint as soon as possible, which that is really our goal and objective. And then obviously working with AIA staff and our governing documents to do this the proper way to make sure that we're taking care of everything we need to take care of with these recommendations that follows procedurally what we do within the bylaws and everything else. So here's the challenges. And these are four things I think that we've really focused our work on. It's role clarity, really identifying what the roles and responsibilities are, not just the board, but all of the governing networks and all of the committees and the stakeholder groups that work directly with the board, because that's important to understand what your role is and what the expectations are and the accountability of what you do in that particular position and the information that's generated and the decisions that are made. And then member voice. So member voice coming up, how do we create a better communication network that voice is heard in the board structure, the decision-making structure, but the clarity of how that's done is really important and the pathways to doing it in a consistent basis so that the communication network goes in both directions. So decisions being made are communicated effectively, but also issues going on within the network are communicated also up so that we're able to use that information to make better and more informed decisions. Looking at the inefficiencies of the structural process and especially duplicative work that's being done right now, we don't want to waste volunteer resources. We know how important your time is and your energy is, and we want to make sure that how we do things first follows the strategic plan as we put forward, and then clear objectives and clear directives into each one of the issues that are being dealt with and the work that's being done across the network. And then, of course, the trust and transparency. We know that the members have felt in the past that they have not been heard, and we want to make sure that those particular things are improved so that the members really do have a pathway, again, both for being heard in terms of ideas and issues and things that we need to deal with, to make suggestions in terms of what the issues are important to the profession that we should be addressing, and also to create better and more open pathways for people to become involved in the leadership process. Okay, Caitlin, next one. So the preliminary recommendations and the working draft are something that we've put forward. And this is where I will be turning it over, I think, to Susanna. Susanna, are you going to take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. Hi, everybody. It's really good to be with you this afternoon. I'm Susanna Kelly. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at McKinley Advisors. And for those of you who aren't familiar with McKinley, we're a consulting firm with expertise in strategy and research and governance. But more importantly, we work exclusively with associations, mission-driven organizations, and membership organizations, just like AIA. So I'm really glad to be with you today and to walk you through the task force's preliminary recommendations and gather your feedback. Just as a reminder, you can put your questions into the Q&A box, which we will be actively monitoring during the call. As Caitlin mentioned, we're going to move through the recommendations and then we'll open it up for questions. If we don't get to all of the questions today, we will capture all of them and share them on the AIA governance website in the FAQ document. There's already a document up there. If you've checked it out, we'll add to that if there's any questions that don't get answered today. Okay, so without further ado, let me talk a little bit at a high level about the task force's recommendations. As Mickey mentioned, the task force is really seeking to respond to the challenges that we just mentioned around role clarity and member voice, the inefficiencies within the governance structure, and perhaps most importantly, addressing these fundamental issues of trust and transparency. It's important, however, as we get into this, to share a little bit about how our recommendations are kind of categorized. They fall into three buckets: culture, process, and structure. So I'll give you some examples, and you'll start to notice these as I move through the recommendations. So a culture change. That could look like revising communication norms to build trust within the organization. A process change could be something like implementing 360 assessments for a governing body within the organization. A structural change could be something like adjusting the board seats to fit the needs of that organization. So in other words, not all of the solutions require a change to the bylaws, which means it's good news. You have the flexibility around timing of when these changes can be implemented and how you sort of sequence change. So let's begin by looking at the proposed revised structure that the task force has put forward. And again, these images are part of a deck which is available on the governance website if you want to spend more time with it on your own. Looking at this from the top to the bottom, some of you who may remember in the, I think it was 2012, 2013 time period of repositioning, there was a lot of talk about this inverted pyramid. And the task force brought that idea back in shaping their recommendations, really recognizing that components and membership are at the top. And that by focusing on the AI's leadership rooting into the membership, into components, we begin to really focus around cooperation, collaboration, and communication. So this structure is really looking to reinforce that model. The governance task force also spent a good deal of time talking about collaboration between the council and the board. And they believe that that is essential to the success of the AIA to affect decisions that are relevant and transparent and responsive to the members and to the operational success of the Institute. So the council is and should be the vehicle to enable the membership network to have a stronger recognized voice to enhance and inform decision-making within the Institute. And further, the governance task force believes that the council plays a really valuable role in elevating member voice within the Institute. The recommendations also include elevating AIA's rich network of knowledge leaders, now represented in the Board Knowledge Committee, which we also call BONOCO, into a body that is better positioned to share its expertise and inform the strategic direction of the Institute. And finally, the task force also has proposed changes to the composition of the board, roles and responsibilities, and board committees, which we'll cover in detail today. So let's walk through each of these one by one. The first category of changes that I will talk through is related to the council. So a few things here, you can read what's on the slide, but I think it's important to focus especially on the rationale for these changes and the spirit of the conversations that the task force has had over the last year. First of all, components value a voice at the national level to influence Institute programs and policies. And in our research, we heard consistently that the composition of the council with the state-based representation model is working. We didn't hear any problems about that. However, what we did hear was that the role of the council is unclear, and counselors are asked to be both strategic and representative, which can cause confusion. The council's work is at times duplicative and out of sync with other work that's going on within the Institute. So the intent of these recommendations is that the council will inform the Institute's strategic direction and provide recommendations to the board to advance the strategic plan's objectives. And I'm going to talk in just a minute about a new strategic planning committee that has been recommended that will do just that. The next piece we'll talk about is the Knowledge Advisory Forum. So I mentioned before, the Board Knowledge Committee, or BONOCO. The feedback that we heard is that their purpose and charge today is unclear, and yet knowledge is really the cornerstone of the AIA strategic agenda and a big part of the member value proposition. So leaders who are coming up through knowledge roles, not component roles within AIA, don't always have clear pathways to leadership within the national governance structure. So the task force's recommendations seek to change that. The profession has evolved as well, and the task force feels that deep technical practice knowledge is needed to help continue to inform board decision-making. When looking at the board committees, the task force looked at ways to streamline board committees, provide clearer annual charges, and update compositions to make sure that board committees are reflective of the membership at large. A couple of changes just to highlight here. The Candidate Development Committee has gotten quite a bit of attention as we have gone through our feedback phase. There's a revised purpose and responsibilities that the task force has recommended to support building a stronger leadership pipeline and empower a network of leadership pathways. The College of Fellows, Young Architects Forum, small firms, large firms, knowledge, all that, all those different pieces. But I want to make an important point. The CDC, the Candidate Development Committee, will elevate leadership competencies and strengthen the pool. They are not intended to be a gatekeeper or limit a candidate's opportunity for leadership. So that's a really important distinction that I want to make sure we're clear about today. I also mentioned earlier the Strategic Planning Committee. This is a new committee, and the intent here is to create clearer pathway for accountability, both in drafting the strategic plan and making sure that member voices are a critical component of strategic planning, but also in identifying organizational priorities each year to advance. And that this committee would be designed to be comprised of board members and council members. And as I mentioned before, that council will really be operating in a focused way to advance those objectives of the strategic plan. We already talked about the knowledge forum, and there are a couple of other changes in here in regard to the climate action and design excellence and equity groups. Finally, as it relates to board structure, this is probably the area that most people think of when they think of governance changes. The task force is recommending increasing the seats on the board from 15 to 21 and clarifying the role of board members to bring constituent group insights and input into the board's conversations and decision making. Now, Mickey's going to talk in detail in just a second about those seats and what the proposed changes are, but I just want to highlight again this rationale that the task force is focused on around why are we making these changes? Well, first of all, by adding seats from the knowledge network, we are able to bring that expertise into board decisions, discussions, practice topics that augment the board's understanding and how that influences institute priorities. By adding qualifications for board positions, we're increasing the quality of candidates. Again, our candidate development committee is helping to source candidates from all across the institute, not gatekeeping, rather filling the pipeline. And then I say this last but not least, this is arguably one of the most important pieces that we heard in our research around members and components really feeling like they're cut off and, if you will, separated from the board. So putting in place explicit responsibilities for board members to create feedback loops and improve the connection between and among member groups to build buy-in and really explain the rationale of decisions that the board is making. So with that, Mickey, why don't you talk through the specific seats and how the task force is recommending those change?
Great, thanks, Susanna. So the slide up now is really the current board structure, and the board currently has 15 voting seats and one seat that is for our EVP CEO, which is a ex officio seat that's non-voting. You've got 4 officers. Those officers are voted on by the delegates at the conference. And we have 3 at-large directors, 3 at-large directors that are elected by the Strategic Council, along with an associate director, the student director, and the case director. Now, the director positions at-large directors are 3-year seats that are staggered, so one turns over every year. And the associate, the student, and the case are all 2-year seats, which flip on a yearly basis. And then currently, the president, with board approval, has 2 at-large directors that are public directors, so to speak, that they can appoint at their discretion on anybody they feel brings subject matter expertise or insight into specific issues that the board will be discussing during that year. So from that model, we'll go to the new proposed model. Now, I cannot emphasize enough that this is a proposed work in progress. And I say that all caps, exclamation marks. This is something that we're putting forward for discussion based on what we've heard and what we felt like would be a good starting point for recommendations, and offer it out so that we can get constructive and hopefully robust feedback, which we have been with the people we've been talking to. But again, it is a working draft, so don't feel in any way because it's somewhat a formal slide that this is a final recommendation. It certainly is not, and we're taking into consideration all of the commentary that we get. So let's start off with the board officers. We have our current 4 board officers: the president, president-elect, secretary, and treasurer. Those terms do not change, and the process of election do not change. We are proposing adding 2 new board officers, one from the Knowledge Advisory Forum and the other from the council. And those nominations would be put forward from those individual groups vetted through the candidate development committee, and then presented to the delegates at the conference, for election. And those would be 2-year seats as well. So those would be staggered seats. So one would turn over every year. We are taking the at-large directors and really making them into a member director, because we want those directors to have the direct communication process back into the network, or the component network itself. Those are 3-year seats, and same as they are now, they would stagger over 3 years, with one turning over each year, voted on by the delegates at the conference. Then we have 3 directors that would be elected by the council. The council would have purview into who these directors are. They could be sitting directors, council persons. They could be former. They could be somebody the council feels is appropriate at the time for subject matter expertise. But certainly, we want to give them the opportunity to have a voice in there, and again, have a connection back, because the council serves as really one of the main focuses on how the communication networks works within the components. Then we are adding 3 new seats for the Knowledge Advisory Forum. They would elect those seats, again, 3-year terms, staggered, one turning over each year. And the idea there, again, is working with the Candidate Development Committee to identify specific candidates with certain subject matter expertise and bring that knowledge to the board so we can help make more informed decisions. The associate director will stay the same and be a 2-year seat. The student director, I mentioned before 2 years, it's actually a 1-year seat now. We're changing it to 2 years because we feel, again, that at 1 year, it's very difficult for a person to come on the board, get up and running, and then suddenly your year is over. So we want to make sure that that seat has value to the person that sits in the seat, but also to their connection into the stakeholder group. Same with the case director, it is a 2-year seat. And we are adding 2 new seats, one for as an international director. As we know, practice reaches out beyond the borders of the United States. Now we have a very robust network of people across the world, and we want to make sure our AIA members that are dealing internationally and firms that are dealing internationally are have a means on which they can bring leadership into the Institute. And then the Young Architects Forum, as well, as there is that is a large and growing group within the Institute, and we felt that that would be of value to have a seat that the YAF could nominate and install every year as a 2-year seat itself, because it represents a group of individuals that are the future of the AIA and are diligently working as young architects in the trenches every day of what's going on in the business world and in the world of architecture. And then we have a single public director that would be appointed by the president. That would be a 1-year term with the option of the incoming president to reappoint that person for a 2nd year if they felt like that person has the expertise that we want to continue on to be able to share with the board itself. And then, of course, we have the EVP CEO that is a non-voting ex officio seat. So we have 21 voting seats, 22 total members, and the of itself, the 21 voting seats, 20 of those seats, well, actually 19 of those seats, if you take out the public director in case, are seated by the members in some way, shape, or form. So what we wanted to do is create opportunity for the members to make the decisions who serves on their board, but also to create new pathways in which we can get people up into leadership, and hopefully that works. Each one of these seats will have a criteria of which we will start to look at on what will be the kinds of things we need to be nominated for that, and then the nominations will go through the Candidate Development Committee. What it will do is hopefully create opportunities for the stakeholder groups, regardless if it's a component, a large firm network, the big states, knowledge committee, the strategic council, to become more engaged in identifying and supporting and nominating people from within their areas to come and serve on the board. So strategically, that's our proposed at this point in time, and I'm going to turn it over now to Caitlin to talk about next steps in the process.
Thanks, Mickey. So just to summarize Mickey and Susanna's the recommendations, I just want to walk through for people to get a little bit better sense of what this model would look like in the future. So walking through the proposed changes, I'm just going to walk through some examples of how different groups in the proposed model would interface with the board and each other. So if the board considers a major decision in this future model, before acting on a policy change or initiating a new program, the board would request input from the council or the Knowledge Advisory Forum to ensure diverse member perspectives to help inform their decision and foster that clear accountability and communication across the organization before making a final decision. So they would engage the stakeholder groups across both the council and the Knowledge Advisory Forum to help inform their decision making. Another example would be if the council identified through their representation model a strategic priority that impacts multiple states or areas of focus, they could package those recommendations up and present them up through their constituents on the board for their review and recommendation. And then the board could then mobilize staff or member board committees to help develop and respond to the need of the council. And then lastly, a similar model for the KCs. If the KCs identified an emerging issue for board feedback, they would leverage the Knowledge Advisory Forum in this new model. They could leverage the council officer to bring those issues to either the board or the council, respectively, to provide feedback across the group. We want this model to be fluid through the recommendations so that these groups better interface, that they can raise up areas of concern or focus, and then the board and these groups can then delegate down and derive direction for the organization. In terms of timeline and next steps, as Mickey alluded to at the start of the call, this is just the very beginning of stakeholder engagement. The current plan is to work through the stakeholder engagement period through outreach through town halls like today, direct meetings with many member groups, board level committees to get feedback, to be able to provide an update in June 2026 at the business meeting in San Diego. At this time, both the board and the governance task force are committed to lengthy stakeholder engagement to really feel like we've socialized the recommendations, we've heard the feedback from various stakeholder groups, and then we can continue to refine the recommendations based on what we're hearing in calls like today and other conversations that are happening throughout this springtime period. If structural changes move forward based on our work, those would be proposed and adopted in June 2027 at the annual business meeting. And then the task force would anticipate a multi-year transition period, which would unfold to recognize current board term cycles and counselor cycles to honor those current appointments. So the timeline you see on your screen here is just a high-level snapshot. It will also evolve based on the type of feedback we receive through these listening sessions. And just as a reminder to everyone, I know I dropped earlier in the call the link to the Governance Task Force website. There is also an open comment period for people who haven't been able to participate in one of these calls or have a question at any point in the period in this stakeholder engagement period. They can always use this QR code on the screen. The link can also be found on the governance website to provide feedback there as well. The governance task force is actively reviewing all the feedback captured, and then we'll make recommendations for refinements and future iterations of our work in the near future. So with that, I do see my question and answer box going off. So I'm going to stop the screen share and we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for discussions. I see questions coming in for both the chat and the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with the ones I see in the chat. And I know I did see also some duplication of them, both the chat. So we'll try to get through these. So the first question I see in the Q&A box was from Bart Shaw, recognizing the emphasis of the small firm exchange. The question is, and I'm paraphrasing, is the task force considering a formal representation mechanism similar to other constituent groups to ensure alignment with these goals? Given the small firm exchange is formally chartered to inform AIA on issues affecting small firms, what is the governance pathway and proposed structure to ensure they're connected to the board level deliberations? Suzanne or Mickey, you want to take that?
Mickey, I think you're muted.
There we go.
Oh,
My
yeah,
apologies.
you jump in and I'll follow.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
So what our strategy is with this is to work with the small firm exchange through the candidate development committee to make sure that the small firm exchange is working hand in hand to push forward the candidates they need on the board. So it's not so much that you get one seat. You can have as many seats as you want if you choose to really identify people that can fit into open seats on the board itself. And so we want our constituent groups to be very active, much more active than they have in the past, to really look at what are the individuals with skill sets necessary to fit open board seats. And it kind of comes under the philosophy of how do we put the right person in the right seat at the right time based on what we need from what the issues are in our strategy moving forward to address at the Institute. So that's really the strategy. It's not so much that we're excluding anyone. It's we hope this gives an opportunity for small firm exchange and other constituents group to be much more active in the process of identifying, supporting, and pushing forward their leaders and working with the delegate network to make sure they get elected.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mickey. And I'll just add a couple of things from a broader perspective. So, and I noticed there was also a question about board size. Um, the first thing to know is that historically, right, associations are relatively a unique thing within the United States. We have these groups that there are so many of them. I mean, literally tens of thousands of associations that represent all kinds of different professions and sectors. And many of them were formed like AIA 100, 150 years ago, right? And when we formed them, we generally created like geographic representation because that was the way, like with phone trees, that we connected, right? Well, that is not what modern governance and associations look like today. Today, boards are asked to be much more nimble. They're meeting more frequently. The external environment is shifting rapidly. And so what we're finding is that smaller boards are more nimble. So I'm going to say that right away. Smaller boards are more nimble. Is there a perfect size? Is there an exact number? There is not. I can't give you a magic number. I can't say that 12 is right and 18 is wrong. That it varies, right? So smaller boards are better. Second, competency-based boards are better. And one of the things that can be a little confusing when you look at the proposed recommendations from the task force is it's easy to look at seats that have names of groups on them and think representation, representative board. That's not the intention of the task force. The intention of the task force is to maintain a competency-based model, as Mickey has described, working with the candidate development committee to build a really strong leadership pipeline and to ensure that as you move through each year's election cycle, that you do have representative distribution across many different diversity metrics, firm size, age, areas of practice, you name it, we could go on and on. The reason why historically we have had a case rep on the board is because case can't otherwise run for a board seat. The reason why we've had an AIS rep is because AIS can't otherwise run for a board seat. When the NAC position was created, it was the same way. Associates weren't allowed to be regional representatives back then, but that's a role that has, in a legacy way, kind of transitioned forward and now exists, even though associates can now be elected into those at-large positions. So there are some aspects of this that you might say, like, well, wait a minute, my group isn't listed here. And that's a little bit of a confusion that I just want to clarify for everybody. The intent is that across all of these different spectrum, that the Candidate Development Committee and all of you, frankly, who are in leadership roles will be helping to identify excellent leaders to move up through the pipeline and to be seated in these and nominated in these roles. I hope that helps to clarify things a little bit more.
It does, Susanna, thank you.
Mhm.
And sorting the questions based on the upvotes so that we can try to get to the questions that are
Good
most
idea.
relevant to the group. There was a next question from John about where are the proposed changes to the procedures? Other than the changing the board composition, where does there does not seem to be anything that clarifies the duties of the council, board, knowledge advisory forum, and staff. More importantly, where are the checks and balances to keep everyone aligned?
That is part of our work in progress right now.
Yes.
And we have started looking at that. We're not at a point yet where we think we can put something out for really have any value for response at this point. But that's our next step in terms of doing it, because that's a really important step. And so, yes, we are working on that. And yes, we have ideas on what that may be. And we want to put it in a format so we can put it out again for more review of the membership and our constituent groups.
Yeah, just to underscore that, I mean, these are preliminary recommendations at this stage. I think the task force felt like we wanted to go out to the larger network and validate, or is this directionally correct, before we spent too much time kind of in the details and weeds of things. And we have heard in other venues that without that specificity, that it can be hard to really understand how this would work. So we definitely hear that loud and clear and understand that that is an important next step.
Cool. There's a question in the Q&A box about why the task force didn't follow the original 2024 resolution, which required the Secretary and Strategic Council to co-chair the task force. And then also kind of folding another question that's related. Why didn't the task force consider component geographic representation at the board level as being addressed, which was part of that original resolution that was put forward in 2024? Mickey, you want to take a first stab?
Sure. So the geographic representation within the Institute right now resides in the Strategic Council. And in our discussions with the Strategic Council, we felt that that was something that worked and that they felt was critically important to the work that they're doing, but more importantly, to be the representative voice of the component network and the members. So that the geographic representation resides within the Strategic Council. As Susanna had mentioned, our intent really on the board seats at this point are to bring together a competency-based board. So rather than geographic representation, we want to get people on the board who have subject matter expertise and knowledge and leadership, quite frankly, leadership experience as well, to really enhance the decision-making progress, utilizing the Strategic Council and the other committees that we have within the board network in order to advise and really kind of guide the board in certain decision-making processes. So we're hoping to make it a much more collective type of connection that gives the board a better breadth of information in order to make more informed decisions.
And I would just add that the task force's work has been centered around the charge that the board provided to them, which was to look broadly across all of the work that AI has done in governance. Some might think, oh, the only work that's been done was the repositioning in 2013, 2014. But the truth is that the Institute has done a number of governance reviews, including the Member Voice Task Force, which Mickey mentioned in his remarks. So they went back and they looked at all of that stuff from the last 10 years as part of their background research. And the 2024 resolution was included in that. We also have a member of the task force who is what do you call it, a sponsor? Is that right? Yes. Of that resolution. And so that person has been very helpful in providing some context to the task force as we've moved through the conversations.
Thanks, Suzanne and Mickey. Next question from the Q&A box. It seems that there is still a minority of the board members who are elected by the membership. Was there a discussion about the mix and proportion of members elected by the membership versus those appointed by other bodies?
Yes, a lot of discussion on that. And I think that's still, something we're looking at in terms of how members get either elected or appointed to the board. The idea there is to be able to reach into different networks to be able to identify leaders and bring them forward into the board positions. So by really looking at how the council, the knowledge communities, an international seat, and then the at-large members as well. I think we're trying to broaden the pathways, so to speak, instead of the typical pathway. How do we create different avenues for people who typically wouldn't go up through the leadership network as they had in the past? So it gives us, I think, better opportunities for more people to be considered for that. So some of the seats may not be directly elected by the delegates at the conference, but they will be put onto place in the board by someone in the member network. These are all members that do this. The groups that will be positioning those board members are all members. So that's the strategy we had in place, to try and identify that. And also remember that I think I see here why wasn't we elect 3 at-large directors. We do. The seats are 3-year seats and they're staggered so that you elect one each year. One seat rolls off every year and then you go through the cycle. And I also want to make it clear that this changeover in the board is not an immediate thing when the decision is made or the bylaws are changed. This is over a set of 3 to 4 years as natural attrition of people who are elected to those seats cycle off of their seat. Then we start to replace that with the new structure as that happens, so that what we don't lose is any of the institutional knowledge. It's just not an overnight thing. We want to maintain as much continuity as we possibly can with that in terms of seating the new board over time. And it also gives us time to really look at how we become effective procedurally and the cultural changes that we need to make as we move forward. So it's not, I want everybody to know that the proposed change process is a timed change that's sequenced over 3 to 4 years.
Can I add just one more thing to that, Caitlin? I know I'm looking at the clock, and I want to make sure we get as much time for questions as possible, but there was also a question in the chat about whether or not all members are able to vote. Today, the Institute's bylaws has a delegate model. So components are assigned delegates. There are other delegates that have assignments. Council members are delegates. There's other delegates that are assigned, board members, etc. But those delegates are the ones who vote on the officer positions that we mentioned, and currently one at large each year, as Mickey just described. This is a really, really good thing for you guys to give us feedback on. We would love feedback on this part because the task force debated quite a bit about whether or not it was feasible for the delegates to vote on a larger slate of candidates each year. And the concern was that if there were too many candidates to be considered, that it actually would make the process would not result in the best candidates moving forward. And so by saying to the council as it is today, hey, council of 50 plus individuals who have been brought forward by their components, you vote and you decide who should be the person who is in this director role. In by extension, the knowledge advisory forum would be kind of a similar model where they would put forward nominations and they would vote. So give us feedback on that. If you think, oh, more of these seats should be considered by the delegates, that would be a good thing. Or maybe fewer of these seats. I don't know. But that would be a really good area to hear from you on, because again, the task force did debate quite a bit about the annual meeting process and how many candidates the delegates currently have to sort of get to know in order to make an informed decision about those elections. So really good questions here. Thank you all so much for giving us the opportunity to clarify, but also reflect on how all of this is coming together.
I'm going to go. Joshua's been patiently had its hand raised. So he was going to ask a question. So Joshua, if you want to go off mute and you can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
We can.
Great. So thank you for this information. It's great that the AIA is actually sharing and trying to communicate this stuff. So I'm going to be the 2027 chair-elect of the Small Firm Exchange. I also sit on the Interfaith Design Knowledge Community Board. I think there's a bit of a disconnect. The SFX seems to be the only member group that's not represented in this new structure. The fact that the committee did not have representation, as far as I could tell, of small firms and certainly of SFX, I think is problematic when it had so many representatives representing large firms. The representation that SFX needs to get an open board seat is really completely illogical and does not represent who the Small Firm Exchange is within this organization and what we do. It is also counter to what you were doing with the knowledge communities, because the knowledge communities are also a mix of members, but they're getting seats. So there really is a disconnect, and I think this is actually a really big hole within this new structure with what's been set up here. I guess it's not really a question because I don't know what you can actually do with it now, but I guess the other question I would have is, when is this going to be implemented and what's the process to have it implemented? Thank you.
Let me thanks for those comments. I appreciate it, and we certainly take everything to heart that you're saying. We do have a meeting directly with you coming up, as I understand it, correct, Caitlin?
Yes,
with
we
the
do.
Small Firm Exchange. Yeah, so so everybody knows, we have been meeting with constituency groups here in the last set of weeks on a regular basis with everybody to try and get one-on-one with each individual group and their commentaries. So we do have a meeting coming up with the Small Firm Exchange here. I can't remember when, but I know it's in the next week or two. And so, yeah, we look forward to that. And certainly, I think let's put this on the table for discussion, and we want to hear your thoughts on it. And also, certainly solutions you think you might want to put forward as recommendations to us for consideration.
And then Mickey, maybe I'll answer the second part of the question, which was the timeline around the work. So any changes to the composition of the board would not be coming forward till June 2027. So we have ample time to continue to refine based on feedback from the group before we present bylaws changes, because those are structural changes that would require approval from the delegates. So right now the timeline is planned for June of 2027. So there's ample time to make refinements and inform future change.
Right. And on top of that, I think that was in response to a lot of feedback we had from the network itself, and that pushing forward based on what the initial resolution wanted to do at this year's conference, I think people were saying they felt like if we tried to do that, we would be trying to push something forward a little too quickly without vetting it out properly. So the decision was made, and this was a board decision, to push this back and to really look at it, do a deeper dive, and do all the things that a lot of the issues we've talked about today, and be able to make sure that we're connecting out into the network and getting as much feedback and working with as many people as possible. And it's a long, very arduous process, obviously, but we want to do it as well as we possibly can, and certainly as transparently as possible.
And Joshua, I'll just add my thanks for your comments. I wonder if your perspective, both as a member, leader within SFX and in a knowledge community, that you might have insights into how those groups operate differently and how they might fit into this ecosystem. I think the task force's intent is that the Knowledge Advisory Forum casts a wider net than just the knowledge communities. And that might not be represented in the graphics that we have today because they're simplified. But maybe when we get into the small group discussion with you this week, next week, whenever that is, we could unpack that a little bit more and better understand kind of how that could all come together more elegantly. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I know we're getting close on time, but we're gonna try to get through like one or two more questions. So one of the questions in the Q&A box was, how do the draft recommendations strengthen, clarify, or otherwise promote the work of the Strategic Council? And how do they reform the communication pipeline between the board and the council for these two leadership entities back to the membership?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're going to, we continue to work with the Strategic Council, and we want to get their input on what they think their role should be as well. This is not something we're dictating down. We want to work together to really look at that. But the structures in place with the geographic representation, which is the original intent, and so the real question here is, how do we improve the communication plan in order to make that work? So each state having a representative on the Strategic Council, we have an opportunity to have a direct connection back to each one of those constituencies. The real question here is, I think, not from the structural standpoint, but certainly from a communications plan and a cultural behavioral standpoint of how do we get that information into the hands of the counselors to distribute through the network. How do we coordinate with CASE on that? And how do we make sure that it's a consistent presentation of the information so everybody's hearing the same thing? So I think that's all part of the communications plan as we move forward, and really looking at that becoming a much more robust and important role for each one of the counselors as well. And by the way, each one of the board members will be responsible for doing the same thing. So constituencies will be connected directly to a board member themselves. One of the things I always said is, look, our board members are all members, and the first thing they should be doing is going to their local component meetings when they're sitting on the national board, because there's a really great opportunity to start the connection process. But also beyond that, making sure we're connecting out to all the other component networks through the board as well. So it's part of the communications plan. And again, it's the work in progress, but that is the idea I think we're trying to push forward.
I know we're short on time. I just quickly wanted to add that again, in the interest of simplifying the materials that have gone out, the task force has had discussions about procedurally how we could improve that process of the council receiving feedback from the board. I think that has been a disconnect a few times. We heard that in our research. So just envision with me for a second, one way it could work in the future would be, again, the strategic planning committee collaborating board and council to identify the next year's priorities. This is the progress we've made on our strategic plan, but perhaps there's an area of the plan that we aren't moving the needle the way that we wanted. And we could look for ways to be really clear with the council about areas to advance in that coming year. The moderator-elect and the president-elect could collaborate on identifying those charges for the council and have timelines that align really closely with when the institute needs that feedback, when the board will make a decision, when resources are allocated, how staff is aligned with that, and getting those procedures in place. I know it's easy to like say it, but it is important to execute on these things, to really have members engaged in ways that are meaningful and they can see their work making progress. So that's just an example of some of the to illustrate kind of the conversations that the task force have had about what that could look like in that feedback loop between the board and the council, advancing the plan and really operationalizing the work of the institute.
I know we're over time and there's more questions in the chat. We will go ahead, like I mentioned at the top of the call, we recorded today's session. We are also can download all the questions that we weren't able to get to. We will update the FAQ tab on that governance website, and we will share out through all the channels and let people know once that's available. Continue to ask questions. We will continue to provide updates there in real time. We have many more calls scheduled with some of the smaller member groups, board level committees, and KCs in the near future throughout March. So we look forward to hopefully meeting with some of these areas in more depth and kind of really unpacking some of the recommendations and hearing more detailed feedback. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time today and all the feedback you've given us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Thanks.